Hey everyone, welcome to Birds of a Feather. Today we're upcycling an old sewing table and we're turning it into a drink station. We're going to show you how to use two different types of wood filler to repair wood damage. Then we're giving you tips on sanding as well as spray painting. And lastly, we're going to show you how to add a decorative element to the front panel.
This is just a piece of 1/8" masonite.
Oh, it's masonite.
Instead of gluing this whole piece, because we have the big holes, we're going to put glue.
Just around the edges.
We're going to use
And then spread it thin?
an acid brush and brown wood glue.
Cool.
So I need more glue, but this is a good start.
So you're going to make sure that's dust free.
Slide it into place. Nice fit.
Give it a wiggle.
Wiggle a little bit. And slide it in and out a little bit. Like that. Spread the glue.
Yeah,
good
perfect.
suction. Make sure it's all
Nice and tight. Now, do you think it'll dry overnight in this humidity?
Yeah, it's usually only about a 20-minute setup time, so it's just work. These pieces of plywood will distribute the weight and pressure. Straight to the other side.
Yeah, that's
Now,
good.
I have one more clamp.
I've got the template on the table, and as you can see, it was pretty much butchered by the previous owner. So we're just having to place it like wherever fits in with like all the holes that are already here. And we're just going to cut out with jigsaw. So there's the overview.
Get a nice smooth finish with this. It's just really slow because of that.
Yeah. Oh, it's looking good though.
Yeah, it's
So
really good.
I figured after we come around the corner, we'll just cut into this part here afterwards.
You said, yeah, yeah.
So we're going to have to sand that flush, fill in all these spaces with some Bondo, and again here, and then we're going to be able to sand this and get it painted. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
There.
Okay.
And I would leave the tape on.
Okay,
That's the
so
pins.
once it dries, we can peel the tape off.
You can clamp it.
Perfect.
Or you can clamp it, the pins keep it from moving.
So we're getting ready to fill the missing veneer, and what we're going to be using is this Famawood wood filler. It's
Water-based.
water-based and our favorite brand. It sands very easily, and there's absolutely no odor, which is great for me because I tend to get headaches from anything that is too smelly. So what we've done here is we've just taped it off just to contain the wood filler, so we're not gouging through when we have to sand here. There's always one piece of veneer that you forget to fill with glue, so we're just doing that now.
In this case, we're just going to use tape as a clamp. Tape it tight there, and then push down, pull down, press tight. And that's good enough. I'm going to use 20 minutes.
And there you go. Now we're ready to fill.
Using it. It dries quick. By putting the tape there, you fill, and it's actually overfilling very slightly. When you take the tape off, you'll see just slightly proud, nice to sand, so it won't be short.
Perfect.
And do the same here. Some more there. Just slightly overfill. You don't want it to be short and have to do it twice. And it sands very easily. Is that it?
That looks good. I think we're done there.
Yeah.
That's all there really is.
So we've got a little cracks here we can do. Push it down into those little cracks.
You can almost do that with a finger, really.
Yeah, so it's pretty safe. You can do that. So it's all filled.
Okay.
And this top is good.
Yep, that's already good. We've already gone ahead and filled a
Filled
few
most
things
of it.
there.
We've sanded it. Filled this with the two-part filler. Little spot there. Look at that.
It's always something you miss. It's always good to
No,
eyeball it again.
And when I do that, it doesn't hurt to put a little piece of tape there to remind yourself to sand that before you paint it. There we go.
Okay, so we're done there. Now we're going to move on to Bondo. And we're going to be filling these hinge spaces here.
And some of this damage here.
Right, so what's this product?
This is a two-part wood filler. It's almost like Bondo you'd use for a car, but it's made by Minwax. It's made for wood. So it comes with one hardener. There's a spare one here. Comes with hardener and the product. And you have to mix hardener with the product. And you've only got about 5 minutes maybe to work with it. You fill it. And then 5 or 10 minutes later, it's ready to sand. Instructions are on here.
Okay, so we're going to take a minute to read the instructions. Then we're going to mix it up and we're going to fill. And as you can see, we've already taped off, just as we showed you previously. Just got a few areas here.
Kneading the hardener a little bit, make sure it's mixed really well because it can be watery up at the top.
And then what are the proportions, just generally for this?
It says a golf ball sized amount of filler, 3/4 of an inch of this. So just by experience, I'm not mixing a golf ball size. I don't need that much. So we've got our two-part filler, which we're going to use for larger damage. Corners of it, of cabinets or anywhere like a softer filler might break out. You can see we used it here because it does a really solid job of fixing an edge. So we want a putty knife. We've kneaded our filler. We have a stir stick. I like a popsicle stick and a plastic lid to mix it on. A screwdriver tip to open it. So here's your putty. You can stir it up a little bit if it's separated. It won't dry on its own at all without that. If you don't put the hardener in, it won't dry. So normally a golf ball size, use 3/4 of an inch of that squeezed out. I don't need a golf ball size. I'm going to use maybe half of that. So I'm just going to eyeball how much of this I need. That's really thin, so it looks like 3/4, but it's pretty slumped down. Now you're going to mix that really, really, really well. Take a minute to do that. Anywhere the hardener isn't in the putty, that's not going to dry, so it has to be thoroughly mixed. It's pretty stinky, you want to do this outside. And I wear gloves because I don't want to try and get this off my hands. If you don't get the hardener mixed well and the right proportion, it may not set properly on your project, so you have to scrape it all out. But it's pretty forgiving, their ratio. Hardener to putty. It doesn't come in different colors, this is it, so you have to touch it up.
Now as you notice,
You're using it.
the wet formulation is much darker than it dries, and there it is dry, so it will dry lighter.
And it will take a little bit of stain, and you can paint over it, prime over it, lacquer over it, varnish. Okay, now you have, it starts thickening up fairly quick. Probably have 5 or 10 minutes, but now to. It's really hard to sand once it's being sanded, so we taped around. We don't want to sand any more than we have to here.
Or I should have taped over the edge, like right there, but it doesn't matter.
But it'll be alright because we're going to be sanding the edge.
Yeah.
So now you want to fill it. You don't really want any low spots because you don't want to have to do this twice. And as it dries, it starts getting thicker. So you see I've overfilled slightly. That's good.
That's good. Let's leave that.
I'm going to come over here.
Oh, I forgot to tape this one here, that far one.
That's all right. We're doing so much sanding here that we're going to be painting this top, so this will be fine. And we're going to push it down into that hole. So push down hard to get it down into that crack, so it's all thicker there. That's good. Just like that. So you can see it's already thickening up a little bit.
Yeah.
It actually makes it a little more, see, a little more usable. It doesn't slump as much. It holds its shape better as it's. But then once it starts to set, it can set really quick. So you're just playing with this to make sure you get it high enough so it's filled. You'll never get it like perfect, but you just want it high enough when you sand it. It won't have any voids. It's hard to tell what's happening here when you get a bigger space to fill. Oops. Oh, I just leaned on that one. That was dumb. Okay, but it's looking pretty good. Ay, ay, ay. Is there anywhere else? Let's leave those for a second. I'm going to come over here. There, okay, that's good. There's nowhere else. That's looking good.
I think we should overfill that just a touch.
It's already hardened.
It's slumping.
Oh, it's already hardened. Look at.
Oh yeah.
Too late.
Wow. Too late.
That was quick. So now what you want to do? Peel your tape off. Watch this. So peel your tape off now, so it's not.
I guess if you don't do that, it'll just embed.
Yeah, it's easier now. You can see what you fill, and hopefully you have enough in there. There, and that's overfilled now because the tape was on there. With the tape, there's going to be a lot less sanding. You see how much putty is being removed where we didn't need it?
Yep.
There. And I think we're high enough everywhere here. See? Look how little you're actually sand. Oh! It didn't work. Somehow it was starting to set up there and dry. We're gonna have to do that later. We'll have to redo it, but we'll sand these first.
Okay.
In case we need more filler here, we can redo that.
But that one we can do with the other one that we don't have to mix.
If we want to, or we can mix this again. That's true. It's pretty small.
Okay.
Now this starts to set up. Keep this lid, and you can see how it's setting up.
Mm-hmm.
It's still too soft to sand. It takes a few minutes. If you were to leave this an hour and then go and sand it, it's going to be so hard that it's going to be harder than your wood. So you actually only want to wait maybe 10 minutes and then sand, and it's more sandable at that point. But I keep this so I can just tell how hard it is.
Okay, that's a good tip.
You can feel it heating up too. This is really warm. Chemical reaction.
Oh yeah.
It's hot as it sets. So I just leave this to air dry. And
I guess another indicator is that once it's cooled down, it's ready to sand too, maybe?
I don't know about that. If you start sanding it a little too early, you'll just clog up your paper. But if you wait too long, it's going to be really hard. So just patiently wait. Don't go and do any more filling. Don't do anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Just wait a couple minutes and you're ready to sand.
Okay. Maybe though, we can just do this very quickly while we're waiting for that to dry. Yeah, with the regular.
You just want to use it. I could mix more of that.
Oh, it's just faster.
This doesn't dry nearly as hard, but it'll be ready to sand, you know, in 10 or 15 minutes, 20 minutes.
Okay, that's great.
Okay.
While we're waiting for the edges to dry, we're just rounding off the edges of the legs. They were sanded down with the sander, the electric sander. And what's the reason that we want to round the corners?
If it's too sharp, it's just sharp to touch, plus the paint or stain or lacquer or varnish doesn't stick so well to a little tiny sharp edge. It's better if it's slightly rounded. And the area where you sand it with a machine, if you sand a little bit by hand, you'll get rid of some of the swirl marks. That's why that sand.
This little box I'm going to be clear coating, so it's not necessary to sand too vigorously. This is a piece of 320. I'm going to do this by hand, and this is sticky, so I'm just going to stick it to my fingers and then just come along and lightly sand. We've got 180 grit paper on our sander here, and it's been about 10 minutes, so we're going to sand it smooth. So the finish is clogging up the sandpaper, which indicates that we need a new piece. So we're just going to stop to switch it out. Over the worst of the worst, and the veneer is in bad shape. Sometimes when you sand, it can lift other pieces of veneer, as you see here. So you have two choices. You can either re-glue and then putty again, or you can just take a knife and cut it and then snap it off and then fill the whole thing. In this case, I think what we're going to do is we're going to, what are we going to do?
We're going to glue it and then do a bit of putty.
Okay, so we're going to get the glue out, and we're going to do as we did before. Just get the glue under there and then tape it and let it dry. It only really takes 20 minutes, and we've got other things to do, so it's not that big a deal.
And then we found a little more here. And here. That to be filled.
Okay, so the rest is looking pretty good. As you can see, that's done. And there's our other pieces there. So we're getting there.
You have putty left on your putty knife. The water base might be able to get off with water, but the two part it's hard to get off. So you can take an old piece of sandpaper and just clean your putty knife up.
Since we're going to be painting the inside, I've just filled the hinge areas with some painter's tape. I'm going to cut away here, and that way we can protect the hinges from being too high after we have paint over spray here. After scoring with the X-Acto blade, I'm just going to lift this away. And here's the hinge area, totally done.
Well, if you're sanding and you find it gumming up a little bit, the finish, sometimes as finishes heat up, like when you're sanding them, they can gum up. So take your time and go to a different area, let that cool down and go back to it. So you don't have to sit on one spot. If you sit on one spot trying to sand it out, it might start gumming up and you'll really see it gummy.
This is the glue repair we just did. It's already glued down, and you can't even really see that it's lifted. And then we did add some Bondo, which we still have to sand.
So this is unsanded here, mostly. It's finished. You want to get all that off just because it's rough. And you always want to sand your corners lightly.
You can see the comparison. So this part is sanded, and this still has to be done.
These are an old shellac finish on these tables, and this is just a stearated finishing paper. It's got a lubricant in it so it doesn't clog up as easy. And boy, you can really tell this is shellac. It powders up instantly. Now shellac is a really good sealer to use underneath paint and varnish and lacquers. So you don't have to get all this off if you're painting, but you do want to clean it up a bit, make sure there's no big scratches.
Now I should mention that shellac would never stand up to outdoor use.
Yeah.
So that's why we're painting it.
Or you could put an outdoor varnish on if you want this original color.
Yeah, so we could go over the shellac, but you do need to give it some treat. The paint we're using is PPG Breakthrough, and that's because it stands up very well outside. And the color is Silver Lining. So I'm just putting it on this white piece of paper here so I can see the color clearly. Here's the table so far. Now we're ready to tape up the legs, and we're getting ready to paint.
You can bring these up and knife them. That's the easiest way.
So we're at the point now where we're taping up the legs, and we're using our favorite tape, which is frog tape. And that's because it's going to give us a crisp, sharp edge with no bleed through whatsoever.
Easiest to bring the tape up like that and just knife it off in your corners.
And you get a clean edge.
Corner.
So now that we've taped this off, we're going to go ahead and tape the rest with some paper. So we're going to grab some of this and just wrap it around. And that saves on tape. The frog tape is fairly expensive, so...
What you do is you take a piece of this. And this is, you can get white or brown paper at your paint store. It's usually for when you're painting trim and that, you can tape areas off. So it's rather inexpensive.
And this has a coating on it that will resist bleed through from the paint. So our wood is going to be totally protected when we go to spray.
If you're taping on top of this other tape,
we'll just show them. Let's just wrap that and we'll show them.
So I'm just saying you can go to cheap tape for areas where you don't need that perfect line. So I can tape that like that. Because this is going onto this tape and we don't need a perfect line, we can just use cheap masking tape here. It's cut a little bit short at the bottom to wrap tape around there, and it's covering our tape at the top. We're just using masking tape because it's much cheaper. It's going on top of this tape. So we're going to start there. Then tape the seam at the back. Now our paper isn't quite wide enough here, so I'll use a little green tape and just fill that seam in with a little bit of tape. And cheap tape on top of the paper. And we can use some masking tape at the bottom. This is natural, so masking tape is fine. So I'll tape it up.
So there we go. That leg is done. And we're moving on to the next. Once you're finished with the frog tape, just be sure to put it back in the container and then pop your lid on so that it stays fresh for next time. We've got our paint right here, and we had our primer actually color match to the paint, and that's because when you're painting over primer and you accidentally miss a spot or you're a little thin in some areas, what you're going to see through is basically the same color as your paint. So instead of using a white primer, it's just as easy to get it tinted up. As we're putting the primer into the nozzle here, we're actually going to put it through a paint strainer, as you can see here. This is our primer, and we're going to strain it.
The medium paint strainer.
We always do this step so that we don't have any clumps in the paint, because that can affect the way it comes through the nozzle as you spray.
And I know by experience, if the paint won't go through this medium strainer, it's not going to come out of the gun properly and atomize properly. So sometimes we added a touch of water to this, maybe 5% water, Get it thin enough. Some paints are really thick. There we go.
Okay, so now we're ready to spray.
So you can use this gauge to set your pressure or how much air is coming out. And I set it around 40. Cover the end, fizzes up here and it reverses the flow and you can clean it better that way. So it goes like that. You can see in there. See it bubbling up?
Oh yeah.
It's reversing. So go forward and reverse. But always use a cloth. You don't want that pressure on your skin. And you can leave this top on. And then we're going to do that a couple times, fresh water.
We're going to leave this to dry for an hour, then we're going to be able to flip it over and prime the top. Then wait another hour and we're ready for final paint. These paint pyramids are going to come in handy when it comes time to flip the piece that we're working on. Here we've got the top piece and we've flipped it over to the back side and we're just going to give it a light scuff. We've got the primer on. And you're not looking to sand back at this point, you just really want to give it just a little bit of tooth and smooth it out. And that's all you're doing. So you're not sanding back.
We're using our stearated, lubricated finishing paper, 320 grit.
And that prevents clogging, so as you can see, it doesn't clog up as you go.
Okay, so that's scuffed.
Now do we need to blow that off, or what happens to the residue?
We can just give it a little light. Just take a... Make sure it's clean.
And what we're using here is just an old stock. So again, we're using our painter pyramids here.
Just be careful because they can dent the top because they're pointy, but put it on there gently.
Okay, so we're just going to spray with the actual top coat. Going to get our paint gun loaded up. Silver lining. It's a color by Benjamin Moore, but we've had it made up in PPG Breakthrough. So we're going to give this a stir and get a little bit into the cup gun. And again, we're using our strainer. It's time to do something fun on the front of the door. And we've just given it a light scuff. As you saw earlier, we filled all these divots. And now what I've done is I've cut out a maple leaf with the July holiday coming up, Canada Day, and of course also Independence Day. Thought it would be fun to do something patriotic. And I've never actually done anything for our Canada Day holiday, so this is a first. What I've done is I've taken some of this adhesive vinyl and traced out my leaf, cut it out, and this is just a clear vinyl. It could be any vinyl that you use as long as it's sticky. So what I'm going to do is peel the backing, stick it on. Then what I'm going to do is dry brush over this darker area, which will cover the areas that we filled. Before I put down my sticker, I'm going to mask off the side area here so that I don't get paint into this area on the side. And what I'm using is frog tape. Once that's on, I'm just going to burnish it really well so we don't get paint where it's not wanted. And I'll do the same with the other side, if I can find my end. And again, I'm masking on the outside of this line so that everything in this area is contained. Now, if you think you might just go a little too far, you can also tape off, extend the area with some green tape. It doesn't have to be frog tape. So you can save a little money there. After you're finished working with the frog tape, always be sure to put it back into its original container because it does tend to dry out and you want it to be fresh for your next use. Now that that's done, going to position the leaf. Be sure you have it right side up. This is the bottom. So you want the stem facing this way. So I'm just going to start to peel an area. And it can be really tricky, so let's see if I can start this at the bottom. And peel it back. I'm going to position it exactly where I want it before I lay any sticky down. I think that's going to look good. So I'll set that down and then lift this back and I'm going to start to peel. So again, I'm just going to bend it back and then gently lay as you go. Starting can be a little tricky because you don't want to accidentally put it down before you're ready. Okay, so Just be sure to smooth out any air bubbles before you proceed, because you don't want any of the paint getting underneath. And then you're gently going to remove the rest of the sticker and burnish as you go. So working from the inside to the outside so that you don't have air bubbles. Now this probably would have been better to do with a solid color vinyl so that you can see how that's looking. So once that's all laid out, just take a moment to burnish the edges really, really well. So I'm going all around the edges, and the edges are the most important because that's where you're going to get your paint seepage. That's how it looks when it's done. Our next step is going to be to use some white paint. I'll just give this a mix. And we're going to dry brush it on. But before I proceed, I think I'm just going to put another strip of tape just on the sides here, just to ensure that I don't accidentally get paint where I don't want it. I'm just going to use one piece of this tape here and lay it down. That's just some added insurance. I've now poured a little bit of white paint onto this lid, and I'm going to dip a soft brush into it, just on the tip of the bristles here. And then I'm going to brush most of it off onto some paper towels. I'm just going to test that. Okay, so you don't want it too wet because you want to prevent paint seepage. So I'm just going to start in the middle and work out to the sides. And with this technique, you can add paint or you can stop and leave it so that it's not quite solid. Now I do want it more solid along the edges to try to cover up where we patched. Time to peel away the paper and get our clear coat on. So here's the back of the front panel, and we're just going to re-screw this on.
Yeah, they're putting it on an angle. Look at perfect. Before you tighten that one, you put both screws in, make sure it lines up. There we go. Now you can tighten them up. Beautiful. There you go.
And the next time you see this, it's going to be totally reassembled, so we're just going to go ahead and do that and show you the reveal.